Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics. Now, anniversaries are usually marked with some form of celebration, but it's doubtful whether Theresa May did much to mark her first year in Downing Street. After starting her premiership with record approval ratings, her decision to hold a snap election backfired spectacularly. And as the government publishes the Great Repeal Bill, is the road to Brexit full of unforeseen political potholes? We'll also be considering the fallout from a controversial decision by county councillors to give themselves a pay rise of 15%. With me on the sofa to discuss these issues are Professor Amelia Hadfield and Liberal Democrat County Councillor Anthony Hook. Thanks to both of them for joining us. But first, Louisa Britton reports on the challenges Brexit may pose to Kent's all-important rural economy.
It may be here in Westminster that many of the crucial decisions regarding Brexit negotiations are taken, but their impacts are felt across the country and have the potential to profoundly impact Kent. And although the road to Brexit seems riddled with uncertainties, many people believe they can make a success of Brexit. Now, I've been speaking to people in different sectors in the county about how they're going to adapt to a world outside of the European Union. A report launched today in Parliament brought together people from Kent businesses and agricultural sectors to put forward recommendations that could help the county prepare for Brexit.
Because of the geographical proximity of Kent to the European Union, there's probably more concern and more issues in Kent than there are maybe in other counties of the United Kingdom.
The agricultural sector in particular relies heavily on workforce from the European Union. With 15% of Kent's workforce in the food industry, there are 15,000 farm jobs in Kent, and seasonal labour from other countries is especially important to fruit growers. And this frontline activity has the potential to be very much affected by Brexit, as the sector has worked within an EU framework since the 1970s. But for many in the industry, there needs to be a proactive approach if the sector is to make a success of Brexit.
Well, a lot of farmers have been very proactive with the harvest workers going out to the countries to sort of reassure them that we still do need them. They're very much welcome. So there's a lot more actively trying to find harvest workers and looking at other export markets and internal markets. Let's not forget a sort of more buy British attitude from the consumers would really make a big difference.
Although many seem to be hopeful about Kent leaving the EU, the future of the county is still unclear. But if businesses and farmers can start preparing for some of the potential impacts of leaving the EU as soon as possible, it seems they'll be in a far better place to be able to make Brexit work in their favour.
Well, Amelia, uncertainty seems to be the buzzword here. And the fact of the matter is, until 2019, no one knows what's going to happen. So what can be done realistically now?
Well, I think you've got something of a vacuum, which from the perspective of academics, and we at Canterbury Christchurch, I think see this as a huge opportunity. You need, I think, to have empirical evidence to be able to offer to the government at this point, because they are trying their very best to come up with a strategy, obviously, vis-a-vis their negotiations with Brussels. What we've tried to do is speak to rural economy stakeholders and the SMEs across Kent and Medway for the past year and a half and get a sense of what they truly want out of Brexit.
And what is it they want out of Brexit?
It's a bit of a mixed question.
To know what
this is it. This is the big reveal. So I think there are a variety of opportunities, probably in the way that some regulations can possibly be remade. But let's be clear, there are a huge number of impacts, at least in the short term, which we're going to feel materially, which we're going to feel financially. And I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we try to imagine that we could cushion ourselves against this. It's certainly something for the rural economy that we need to be aware of. It's going to hit farmers, I think, quite badly, but also SMEs themselves and those in Kent because of their proximity to the European Union. I think we need to be aware that somewhere between 2019, 2021, whatever the transition period duration is going to be, we're going to see probably a downturn in terms of trade with the European Union and the onset of tariffs, which, however moderate, is certainly going to impact.
Let's bring in Nancy here. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Anthony, your party is trying to derail everything, isn't it? You're trying to frustrate the will of the people.
No, the Liberal Democrats are standing up for the interests of people in Kent and across Britain. And we're right to point out that there's evidence coming from independent, neutral academic research that Brexit is working out really badly already.
Well, how can you say that? Because we haven't actually got to Brexit yet. No. We're sort of on the path towards Brexit.
The damage it's already doing is in the labour supply to farming, as well as the tariffs and the support that the EU gives to the Kent farmers with the CAP. The big issue is the supply of people to work on our farms and in the food and drink industry, which we have to remember is the biggest manufacturing industry in effect in the whole of the UK. And we've heard from this report that already there's been a 50% drop in the number of people coming forward to work in Kent's farms. That means there's a shortage of people to do the work that's needed.
So, Amelia, there's a very practical factor here, is that the farming community needs workers to come and do the jobs.
And so does the business community. I think we're talking about the investment climate in Britain as a whole, and right now that climate is riven with mixed signals because the government doesn't yet, I think, have a clear steer on what it wants vis-a-vis the Brexit scenario. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit, somewhere in the middle, and until we have a clearer understanding, I think business itself is reluctant to do anything other than invest tactically day to day, maybe week to week, but I think it's difficult for them to really be able to project much beyond 2 or even 3 years into the future, and who can blame them?
Okay, well, that debate's going to go on for some time, at least until 2019. Now, she's been dubbed Maybot, but Theresa May revealed she had shed a tear when she saw the exit polls on election night, and who wouldn't? But as she tries to reboot her premiership, what do voters make of her first year in office? We went to Chatham High Street to find out.
To be honest, she hasn't been very revolutionary. There's not many changes. It seems like she's just kind of tied up loose ends and picked up a lot of mess that people have left.
Not very well for us pensioners, I'm afraid. We have to really watch what we spend our money on.
To have a general election which went all wrong for her. She keeps changing her mind about this, that and the other. To me, she's a dead woman.
She should never have had another election, but she did. She took a risk, you know. But other than that, I think she's good. She's very experienced as well. People forget that.
To be honest, I'd always been a Conservative voter, but I don't think she's strong enough to lead a party, and I just don't think she's not the sort of person I would vote for. Not at all.
Anthony, give us an impartial, neutral analysis and perspective on your impressions of Theresa May's first year in 10 Downing Street.
Total disaster.
Well, that's not great. Come on.
A leader's got to promise to offer a vision and try and deliver it. And I think right now people aren't feeling either of those things from Theresa May. There's no clear direction about the ways in which she wants to try and change the country for the better. There's no sense of any connection between some sort of mandate that she's won for that vision, and she promised strength and stability, but the overwhelming sense I detect among people is they feel weakness and instability, unpredictability, and I think people in England are really disappointed that the government is now being propped up by the DUP.
Let's hear from Amelia to give us a less partial analysis, perhaps, of
I think I'm struck by two things, Paul. I mean, the first one really is the two Theresa Mays that we see. The Theresa May who came into Downing Street with some, what could have been very socially imaginative policies, that quite famous speech about wanting to genuinely transform Britain on a variety of levels. The jams, yes, like so many Kent strawberries. And now, I think, having been very severely bruised as a result of the general election outcome, she seems to be hobbled, obviously, as a result of a poor decision, and I don't think the Tory party is going to quickly forgive her for this poor decision. Worse, though, is the fact that she's now not listening. She's made it perfectly clear that she's going to try to forge ahead, and as concerns businesses and the type of Brexit scenario that we were talking before, I'm astonished at this point that she still hasn't learned to some extent the lesson that I would have thought the general election outcome would have taught her. Be more of a listening Prime Minister, be more responsive, be more agile, be a little more honest in this sense.
Okay, well, let's hear from Helen Whately, Kent MP, about what she thinks of Theresa May's first year in office.
I think it's an incredibly tough job to be Prime Minister at the moment, with Brexit, with all sorts of challenges, with terrorism, with tensions, with rising cost of public services. There's so much to deal with. I think it's really important that we don't focus on Brexit to the exclusion of everything else. We've got a lot else to do domestically, and I really welcome that Theresa May is making sure that alongside Brexit, she is determined to try and address some of the problems like inequalities and people feeling like they haven't got a chance to make their lives better.
Well, in a sense, Anthony, it's the kind of ultimate Uber gig, isn't it, being Prime Minister? Do you have any sympathy for her and the pressures that the Prime Ministers, not just her, but all Prime Ministers, are under and have to endure.
Well, I'll tell you, I couldn't hear because of the setup. I couldn't hear Helen Whatley's words, but her body language spoke volumes to me. It looked very downbeat and downcast. I think the Conservative Party know they've got a leader who's leading them very badly. And of course, being Prime Minister is a difficult job, and we've had good Prime Ministers and bad Prime Ministers, but I don't think there are any signs at the moment that history is going to remember Theresa May particularly well. And I think this decision to prop the government up by giving £1 billion extra to Northern Ireland at the expense of England, Wales and Scotland, to do a deal with a party that is anti-abortion, that's homophobic, is really going to damage our country.
Amelia, what do you think about this? I mean, we've seen a lot of debate this week about the abuse that politicians get, and sometimes it might be valid or justifiable, or sometimes it might not be. Not the abuse, but the general comments and criticism. Is it the case that social media has made things more difficult and challenging for politicians?
It certainly provides a much more invasive and sometimes uninvited forum, and it's very micro in the sense that it's very personal. It's also extremely quick, so there's a sort of a sense of immediacy about it. Yes. So I think we do rush to judgment, but at the same time, I think for leaders, they're very astute, very adept at making use of social media to put across a particular point. So I think my sympathy with May is limited to this extent. She could have made excellent use of social media if she wanted to, but she blew it. She had a sort of sloganeering approach.
How long, if the repeal bill gets into difficulty, do you think the Conservatives are going to act very quickly, or yes or no?
Well, the very fact that it's now called the repeal bill, not the Great Repeal Bill, suggests that there's a tremendous constraining of ambitions, if you like, I think, on all fronts.
OK, moving on. Coming up after the break, that row after councillors give themselves a pay rise and Kent's own Prime Minister for the day. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Paul on Politics, your weekly politics chat show that's all about Kent. With me on the sofa to discuss this week's issues are Professor Amelia Hadfield and Liberal Democrat County Councillor Anthony Hook. Now, if you were going to give yourself a pay rise, what would it be? There's no doubt that this week's big political controversy in Kent has been a decision by county councillors to award themselves a whopping 15% pay hike. Unsurprisingly, the news has not gone down well, especially with the public who pay their allowances. So is there really any justification for the increase? Let's hear first from the leader of Kent County Council, and then some voters have their say.
Well, first of all, your viewers need to understand the context. Elected members haven't had their remuneration reviewed since 2008, 8 years ago. And in that first year, we took a voluntary reduction of 5.5% in our special responsibility allowances and 1.5% on the basic backbencher allocation. So we've had a reduction, some of about 5.5% over that 8-year period. The average wage increase of both the private sector and the public sector over that period of time has been 16.5%. So we're still way behind what everybody else has had, which I don't think is unreasonable.
I genuinely don't think it's fair, because there are people like me that work their butts off for absolutely nothing, because we end up getting council tax so much, and it gets to the point where you can't afford your flat very, very well. You end up working double hours, double shifts.
The people that pay their wages eventually are only getting a 1% increase. The likes of all the taxpayers are only, public services are only getting a 1%. Why should they get 15? Why do they think they're that special that they should get 15% increase?
Why should they get to choose that they get more money than we do because they're older than us, because they're in a position of power? And I don't think many young people will feel represented.
Well, they should spend it on mental illness and have a special place for mental patients.
Well, Anthony, the case for this increase is partly that there's a need to get different sorts of people into local government who perhaps at this point can't afford to do so. Fair enough?
That's a real problem, but this is the wrong answer. I made that point in the debate yesterday when I voted against the 15% rise, as did all the other Liberal Democrat councillors. There is a big problem in the council chamber that it's not representative society. I'm one of a minority of the councillors who are of working age. We've also got not the gender balance that we ought to have as well. But
so you say it's the wrong solution.
Yes.
What is the right solution?
The real fundamental obstacle to there being more working age councillors is the fact that the county council's meetings take place in what for most people are normal working hours.
Really? Just the fact that they have daytime meetings? I mean,
yeah,
if you're a family person who becomes a councillor, you have the same problem finding perhaps childcare in the evening.
Childcare is an issue, and we need to make sure that councillors who have children are able to be supported in childcare. So that's one reason, especially why young women are put off from standing for the council. But I know there are men and women, say in their 20s, 30s, 40s, who would make great county councillors, but aren't able to stand because of the nature of their work. Means they can't take a number of days off each month to attend council meetings. So many councils, metropolitan unitary councils, councils in London, have their meetings in the evening. Kent should shift to that, and that would open up a great deal of opportunity. That point was made in the debate yesterday, and some of the Tory councillors replied, but we're out every evening. Well, that's simply not a good enough answer, and the idea that increasing pay by 1,000 or 2 will fix the bigger problems we've got is just utter nonsense, and it was the wrong decision that was made yesterday.
Emilio, it is the case that a lot of people might be deterred from standing because they simply feel they can't afford it.
I take very much the point that our council needs to be representative. That makes a lot of sense. It can be socially representative. We do need a bigger spread, gender-based and also generationally, I think, as well. But I think it's also financially got to be representative of the population as a whole, and a 15% pay rise is well above anything we would see in virtually any sector, including the academic sector.
They're claiming that it's sort of
bringing them up to par.
Compounded over various years, and that's why it's justifiable.
I think it's a particularly difficult pill to swallow, not only against the context of the pay cap rises we've seen in the public sector in the last couple of weeks, but specifically, I mean, against the context of austerity as a whole. Kent, I think, is suffering as much as any other places in the country with regards to austerity, and to see our councillors having a 50% pay rise is going to be difficult to justify unless, as Anthony says, you can explain it in terms of a better form of representation.
Well, the other argument has been simply that councillors have not taken any pay increase at all, in fact taken a pay cut, and this is just reflective of that compounding interest over the years, this 15%.
One thing I think will really jar with people, though, is that this decision has been made 2 months after the election, and it was being discussed several months before the election, and one can only speculate as to why they put the decision off. And I think people... Well,
I think we all know the answer to that.
Exactly. It's so obvious. And one thing that was mentioned in the debate yesterday, which was a really attractive idea to me, is that in the States and in other countries, public bodies don't set their own pay, they set their successors' pay. So when Congress votes on its salary, it doesn't decide its own salary, it decides the salary of the next Congress. So I think what we should have done to take a more disinterested approach would be for the present council to decide the allowances of the future council in 4 years' time, which some or none of us may be serving in.
Is that a model, a way
I like
forward?
that forward-thinking legacy, actually. Yes,
yeah.
It's certainly something to see if we could build in if it makes sense in Kent. Why not?
And you talk about attracting people from different backgrounds in there. It is a bit of a sea of grey suits when you walk into the Kent County Council chamber. But on the other hand, you could argue that's kind of reflective of the social demographic of large parts of Kent.
I don't know. I think there's lots of young people in Kent, and Kent is obviously 50% male and female, and we don't have that balance in the chamber. Let me ask you,
how many female candidates did the Lib Dems put up in the county council election?
Not enough is the answer, and I don't know the numerical answer to your question, but the answer is not enough.
Are you in favour of quotas, targets?
I think what's happened in Canterbury with regards to the outcome of the general election shows actually that there's some very vocal and very agile parts of the Kent demography in terms of the youth, in terms of the internationalisation, if you like, of Kent, and we shouldn't really discount it. I don't tend to think of it as a sort of grey wave at all. We need to get these different forms of folks, of different kinds of voices and narratives and needs, and get them much more proportionally spread across Kent County Council.
It's a good point, isn't it? Perhaps local government is just not seen as either valid or interesting for younger people. It's a big turn-off.
Yeah, I think we could devolve more power to local government. I think within the UK we're far too centralised. Something like 80% of all public spending is controlled by the national government at Westminster. Other European countries have much lower figures. Even France, which has a reputation as being a heavily centralised country, has a much lower figure than that. So I think we should...
power devolved down to...
Yeah, more responsibility, because people want to be involved in something where they can make a real impact, make a real difference to their community. Assembly, and if we devolve more power, I can't see why we can't do it. I mean, just here in Kent has a GDP of about 36 billion. That's comparable to Wales. I can't see any reason why Kent couldn't be devolved very similar powers to the Welsh Assembly.
That's something the Conservatives are arguing, interesting enough. OK, well, thank you for that. Now, at least one politician from Kent has had a good week. Ashford MP Damien Green was thrust into the political limelight when he took Prime Minister's questions for the first time. The weekly ritual of answering questions can be a political minefield, but the consensus was that he did a reasonably decent job standing in for Mrs May. Here's a clip.
But we're also saying that it is conceivable that we would be offered a kind of punishment deal that would be worse than no deal. It is not our intention. We want to have a deal. We want to have a good deal. Can I also point out to her that it is her leader and her party's position that whatever is on offer, they will accept it. That is a terrible way. That is a terrible way to go into a negotiation.
Well, it was interesting, that PMQs, because it lacked some of the malevolent kind of spirit that you sometimes see, the nastiness. They seem to be actually enjoying a good debate for once.
Yeah, it was more civilised, which we've seen for a while. It made me nostalgic, though, for the days when Nick Clegg used to stand in for the Prime Minister when he was Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And back when we had a coalition, we had certainly more strength and more stability in the government than we've ever had since. I think as a whole, PMQs is not particularly helpful. It was better than usual.
It's great for people like us, though, isn't it?
It's great for journalists, it's got drama, but do we ever get to the truth? Do the people ever really hear answers to questions? I don't think they do. And the bear pit of the House of Commons, this kind of aggressive confrontation, I think is really unwelcome. You sometimes see very childish behaviour going on.
What's your view, Amelia? Because the confrontational kind of aspect of it is what attracts a lot of people.
The combative element of it, I mean, it's practically medieval in some senses, but at the same time, if you're trying to excite students with regards to the sort of political dynamism of the day, PMQ is a very nice case study to get them excited in the toing and froing. I thought Damien Green did very well. I would suggest it was maybe slightly more collegial than I would have expected, but it's always fun to be Prime Minister for the day. And I think Kent as a whole, in terms of the sort of MP spread, MPs with portfolios, working portfolios, is rather impressive. I think we're probably up on the national average, and to have Damien Green standing up. I think what I would have preferred is rather more clarity from Damien Green vis-a-vis Brexit. I think he had to toe a bit of a line to some extent, but he could easily have afforded to articulate some of his own views, which I presume is probably why Theresa May appointed him in the first place. A different view, a different voice.
Would you like the job?
How would you feel about taking on the PMQs?
I've got a great job being County Council for Faversham.
So have I.
Yeah. But that's good. But I think we should see a change. One thing they're doing at the moment is there's been a lot of money spent rebuilding the fabric of Parliament, and maybe we should get rid of this two sides opposite each other. Most countries in the world have a hemisphere or a more circular Parliament. In fact, I don't know of any country, I'm sure there is some, Canada has this confrontation.
Yes, but there is the European Parliament is very like that, isn't it?
The European Parliament is a hemisphere.
That's not wildly loved by people, is it, particularly?
No, but the Australian Parliament is a hemisphere. Most of the European ones are. The American Congress is, and I just think it would take a bit of the confrontation and the aggression out of the House of Commons.
Does politics need less aggression?
No. I think aggression is very much what sells it to the people. It needs less toxicity, if you like.
Okay. Well, that's all from us here at Paul on Politics. Thanks very much to our guests for coming into the studio. We'll be back soon.